About. We continue our lineup of budget makers. Joining us here in the CNBC-TV18 budget headquarters, the Chief Economic Advisor Anantha Nageswaran and the Revenue Secretary Sanjay Malhotra. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program, and I would imagine that today will be a day of well-deserved rest at the end of the interim budget, but the clock starts now for the main one.
Well, it's the well-deserved day of rest. We have to wait for another one more day at least. Yeah.
But this was just a promo, a teaser?
You can say so.
You know, your review, which came ahead of the budget, sort of set the tone for what the budget was going to unveil and what the budget was going to say. I think the big highlight really has been as far as fiscal consolidation is concerned, and the very sharp 70 basis point cut that the government is estimating as far as fiscal consolidation goes. Do you believe that that opens up the room now, even for the MPC to act going forward and look at lowering rates?
No,
what will this mean as far as cost of borrowing is concerned?
Shereen, I don't want to go into what MPC should be doing,
but,
so I'll leave it there.
But what do you believe will happen as far as cost of borrowing is concerned, given the fact that aggressively you're chasing fiscal consolidation?
Absolutely. I mean, it's realistic, it's not aggressive, it's realistic, and we are not overestimating growth, we are not overestimating revenue buoyancy.
In fact, the quibble is that you're underestimating.
Exactly. So we are doing it realistically, and that shows that we are being, the path of prudence and transparency that has been followed over the last several years is paying dividends. And I think the rating agencies will, and I hope, and they should take note of it.
So an upgrade is what you expect on the back of the glide path that has been stated today?
No, our expectations don't really matter. What matters is what matters is what we are doing. We are doing all the right things, and therefore it is for them to take notice of that.
But, you know, a 70 basis point shaving off as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, what do you believe could be the potential challenges in being able to achieve that?
Well, one could always talk about the global environment, the price of oil contributing to lower GDP growth, etc. But I think the fact remains that our assumptions are realistic enough, like it was this year. For example, this year, nominal GDP growth is going to be less than what we assumed, but yet the numbers are able to give us, we're able to achieve a gross fiscal deficit ratio of 5.8%. So in that sense, the conservatism, it will stand us in good stead, despite the fact that the world economy is still rife with uncertainties.
Yes, the world economy is rife with uncertainty, and I'll come to that in just a second. But let me get the Revenue Secretary also to address this issue of conservatism that people are highlighting and what you see as the road ahead from here on.
No, I think, it's a very realistic budget. And the very fact, that we have been able to continue to spend on and budget, for the capital expenditure and not giving, not increase, the revenue expenditure so much should bring in confidence in everyone that the fiscal numbers, the deficit numbers, the numbers for our revenues are very, very realistic and very achievable.
You talked about the capital allocation. I want to get both of you to comment on that, because there was an expectation that there would be a tempering as far as that number is concerned, given the fact that we are coming off record high numbers in terms of capital allocation. Would it be fair then to assume that, the 10-11% would now be the new normal as far as capital outlays are concerned?
We don't need to think too far ahead. At this point, as the FM also mentioned in the press conference a while ago, this 11% growth is coming on a very high base.
Correct.
Now, obviously, next year, if we get to 11 crores, 11.11 lakh crores, etc., the base will be even higher. So, and if the private sector is kicking in, we will basically cross each bridge as we come to them.
On the private sector, and I think the Finance Minister alluded to that as well, that the reason why there has been a seeming pullback as far as the government's sort of capital outlay is concerned, because you see the private sector coming in, and you've been, of course, talking about incipient and now very clear signs of private capex picking up. Lay out for us where you believe we're likely to be over the next few months.
No, first of all, I would like to clarify, Shereen, that the government is not pulling back on capital expenditure. It is the rate of growth, that is rate of growth of capex increase that is slowing down. The government is not pulling back.
Fair enough. Yeah, but on private capex.
No, we are seeing it in the data. I mean, on listed companies, private sector capex has been rising. And if you look at the announcements, if you look at the data on new fundraisings, all these things point to the fact that, and the revival in the manufacturing sector, all these things are pointing to a good growth in private sector capex. I can't put numbers on it because after all, it is an aggregation of so many companies out there, thousands of them. And I think we are seeing a very good pickup even there as well.
You know, I just had the CBDT chairman here, Mr. Malhotra, and of course, one of the big highlights is the tax to GDP ratio, which is at a century high, as the CBDT chief was also pointing out. You know, in terms of prioritization now, if this was the promo and this was the trailer, there are many sort of unfinished things on the agenda that need to be considered. What is being mulled at this point in time, whether it is capital gain simplification, that of course has been on the anvil for a long time. We don't know whether there is any more clarity on how you intend to take that forward. Lay out for us what the roadmap could potentially look like.
No, right now we are looking at consolidating, and we are looking at, being able to achieve whatever are the numbers that have been given to us. Number one, that is, most important for us, because if, the CA and, if the fiscal numbers have to be actually met, the target that has been given to us for revenue, that has to be achieved. And you already mentioned that it is coming, on a very high buoyancy, a buoyancy of 1.4, because the economy, is expected to grow at 8.9%. And the overall tax revenues this year are expected to grow at 12.5%. They are growing at 13% right now. So that means a buoyancy of 1.4. And then, again, a buoyancy of 1.1 next year. 10.5% GDP expected to grow, and 11.5% tax revenues gives us almost, a buoyancy of 1.1. So to be consistently improve revenues more than, the growth rate in GDP, that is, going to be the first challenge. And that is, that is very important. Having said that, of course, for us, and that is, without increasing any tax rates. You have seen, there are no tax rate increases this year. Last year, there were huge tax rate cuts. Before that, there have been tax rate cuts, both, on corporate tax as well as, on the personal income tax rates. So we are certainly, not looking at increasing the tax rates. So how do we do that? Of course, we have to deepen, our tax base. We have to widen our tax base, and we have to make it, easier for people to file tax returns, easier to, do compliances, and easier, to make those payments and plug, whatever are the loopholes that are there. So that's going to be, the areas of focus.
Well, unlike last year, where there were a couple of points of controversy, including, of course, what we saw happen as far as gaming was concerned and TCS this time around, and nothing much to quibble about. But on both of those issues, and I know you clarified that there is no change as far as the TCS rate is concerned, it is basically legitimizing or just reaffirming the rate that was put out as far as the press release goes. But on gaming specifically, now the matter is sub judice. Where do things currently stand?
Let me first of all tell you, that the changes that were made for online gaming, of course this is not a budget issue, but since you have asked this, from 1st October, our revenues have multiplied to 6 times. 6 times. Over the 3 months, that revenues that we have got, they are averaging about 1,200 crore, vis-a-vis 200 crore per month revenues that we were getting.
And only from the online gaming platform?
Only from the online gaming platform. This does not include, the casinos, etc. So there was a huge potential which was there, which was untapped, and which we have been now able to tap. Insofar as the question as to whether, these changes were retrospective or prospective, of course, these changes were prospective. Retrospectively also, our belief was that the online games were liable to pay a 28% tax rate because these were actionable claims. Their claim is that these are not actionable claims, and so, they are liable to pay 18% on what is called GGR. So that dispute is in the court. But going forward, there is no issue. All of them are paying 28%, and they are paying 28% on the actual value paid.
Let's address the global uncertainties that you just spoke of. And we just had the Fed present its commentary last night. And the expectation is now that a March cut looks unlikely, and the cut is probably moved further down the road. There is also, of course, what is happening in the Middle East, specifically what's happening in the Red Sea and the potential of that impacting inflation if this were to be a protracted, long-drawn affair. How do you read both these developments?
Well, I think the decision by the Federal Reserve to probably give an indication that rate cuts are not imminent isn't really going to materially affect the glide path for our economy or the interest rates, etc. I think we saw that the Indian economy's interest rate increases weren't really walking lockstep with the Federal Reserve over the last 2 years. So that we can kind of leave it out of the picture for the time being. Now, more important thing is what you mentioned about the Red Sea conflicts and the implications that they carry for supply chain disruptions and therefore potential for inflation. However, it's interesting that in a way, since the conflict broke out in October in Middle East, and oil prices have still been quite subdued, very well contained, and over the last 4 months now. So we'll have to wait and see. The supply disruptions have to be much larger, overcoming the demand slowdown that is occurring because of slowing growth in the US and in the Eurozone, etc., and also the continuing economic stagnation in China, etc. The demand side is also helping to cushion the possible uncertainties, but these are things that we can't really map out far too many scenarios at this point, except to keep an eye out for them.
Yes, these are developing situations and scenarios at this point in time. But, you know, from a Make in India aspiration, and we've, of course, seen a continuation of measures being announced, whether it was the PLI scheme or just ahead of this budget, the cut as far as import tariffs were concerned from 15% to 10% on electronic components for the mobile phone manufacturers. Your assessment on how things are working on that front, especially keeping in mind the supply chain diversification that's currently underway. Are we really making good of the opportunity that exists? And what more perhaps needs to be done?
No, absolutely. These changes that were brought in with regard to the import duties on mobile phones, again, you know, that's a step towards simplification, because if we have, you know, too many rates, and we had, you know, a 10%, a 15% and a 20% rate on similar products, on overlapping kind of items. So this was a move, you know, towards simplification. Not so much, you know, I don't think it is so much, you know, about reduction. It is, of course, you know, we have reduced those rates,
right,
but it's more about, you know, providing clarity. So going forward, again, you know, the import duties, as you have seen, you know, wherever, you know, the PLI schemes are there, we will continue to support the PLI schemes. The import duties are there not, you know, primarily as a measure of revenue, because they are quite small. 2 lakh, you know, out of a total budget revenue target, you know, of about in excess of 35 lakh now, touching almost 40 lakh. So it's 6%, maybe about 6%. So it's not so huge. So the customs duties are changed basically to promote our manufacturing and keeping in view, you know, the inflation. So we will continue to support that.
One of the expectations was that the 15% concessional tax for new manufacturing facilities would be extended beyond the sunset of March 2024. That hasn't happened. Does that mean that the window is closed on that, or does the window remain open perhaps for the next budget?
That window certainly will close, you know, on 31/3/2024 because it's not been extended. See, it doesn't help. If you extend it, you know, for another 6 months, 9 months or 1 year, it really doesn't help, because industries, you know, have a gestation period of at least, you know, 2 years. Big industries, for them to come in, they need, you know, certainty for a long period of time, because to make those investment decisions first and then to, you know, put them on ground takes a lot of time. And so when, you know, this scheme was actually announced in 2019, sufficient period was given. It was further extended because of COVID. Sufficient time was given for that, and we are beginning to see, you know, benefits of those number of companies have actually started, you know, manufacturing. Some of them are taking benefits thereof.
Right.
Also keep in mind that the corporate tax rates today are very competitive. I mean, 22% is not a very high number.
So the window closed as far as being able to avail of that 15% concessional tax rate beyond March 2024. As far as consumption is concerned, and again, the expectation was that perhaps to further drive the rural consumption, there would have been an enhancement of the PM Kisan scheme, for instance, also factoring in inflation, etc. That has not been the case. Of course, there are other announcements that have come in, particularly around housing and solar rooftop and so on and so forth. On balance, from a consumption perspective, how much do you believe the needle has moved?
I think there was an announcement before the budget last month about the extension of the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana for 5 years.
Yes.
And I think that was a very big announcement. That was a very big support to consumption. And as you yourself pointed out right now, there is the extension of the PM Gramin Awas Yojana and then the Lakpari DT scheme. So, and if you look at the data on automobile sales, starting from two-wheelers at the end of the calendar year 2023, there has been a definite pickup in the sale of these vehicles, starting from scooters all the way up to four-wheelers. So I think, and lastly, I would say this is an interim budget, so we should remember that.
It is an
And the focus has been really, over the years, as you have seen, last year, this year, and before that, on capex. And capex in itself, of course, increases consumption in itself. So employment, incomes, and then consumption. So I would rather see that as a positive.
Right.
That we have been able to spend more and more on capital expenditure.
Yes, and that certainly has been the case. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 with your take on the interim budget. And of course, more is likely in the next few months as the government gets ready to prepare the full budget. But thank you so much for joining us here this evening. Appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you again. We will take a break, but budget makers continue here on CNBC-TV18. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with more. For more news and updates, all you need to do is follow CNBC-TV18 on all of our digital platforms.